Well, today is Thursday, as we mentioned, and you all know what that means at this point. It's time for a Throwback Thursday. Joining me is none other than Lori Kent with the Local Podcast.
Oh, good morning.
Thanks
Time for some
me.
history.
So excited. Did you have time to think?
You know, yeah, I've got something. I've conjured up something.
Okay,
you
good.
mentioned Duluth, so let's go to Minnesota.
Oh, okay, yeah, there we go.
So we're actually going to have a little bit of Minnesota history
Ooh.
weaved into this. So I was in Brookings, and so coming back from Brookings, I stopped on the side of the road because I saw two historical markers and a monument, and I'm like, this is my stop. And so I decided to find out a little bit about their area. So this is a historical marker for Medary Townsite, and it talks about how the Dakota Land Company, which was from St. Paul, Minnesota, but at the time Minnesota was Minnesota Territory, of course, so they were coming here because our area was part of Minnesota Territory. So we weren't a state yet, we weren't even Dakota Territory, but we were on our way to becoming Dakota Territory. And so they were planting towns in these sites that they thought, well, maybe this could be the capital one day.
Yeah.
And so, you know, since you might not have heard of Medary, you kind of know how this ends. Not the capital of South Dakota.
Yeah.
But so Dakota Territory is on the horizon, but not quite here yet. It's 1857. They start this town site. And it's great. It's a nice little town site. It's cute. And there's only two other towns in what's going to eventually be South Dakota. We had Flandreau and Sioux Falls. That's it. So this is the third one, Medary, and it's has possibilities. However, you know, there's some difficulties that are going to come here, and it makes sense, you know, with our vision now, we can understand the pitfalls of this plan. And part of that is this area wasn't necessarily free to be settled. It had been Native American people's territory forever. And so even though the Native Americans had ceded this land, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was ours. You know, looking back, we understand that a lot of these deals were awful at best, sometimes illegal, and in other cases, we made deals with the wrong tribes, like tribes that didn't even live in that area. So it's easy to understand that we were considered trespassers. And so in 1858, a chief of the Sioux came to the village and was like, you know, we would like you to leave, and if you don't, we are going to burn this town to the ground. And so the settlers, they talk about this. What do we do? Do we stay and fight, or do we evacuate? And they chose to evacuate, which was a really good choice.
Probably.
Because he was not kidding. They burned it to the ground. They destroyed all the buildings. And so Medary isn't the only place that got evacuated, though. Flandreau also got evacuated. And Sioux Falls, they don't get evacuated yet. They get evacuated a couple years later in 1862 when the Dakota Uprising comes through, and they too evacuate and then get burned to the ground. So, you know, there's some ebb and flow here with this settlement. So Medary then stays completely desolate for about 11 years, and that's when they try again to settle. They're like, you know, let's do this again. We have a couple handfuls of Norwegian immigrants that they're willing to give this a go, and they were successful. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that the town is successful, but the families were. You know, the problem that comes in here is we've talked before about the railroads, right? And if that railroad doesn't come near or through your town, do you have a town? You might just have farms. And so unfortunately the railroad, it gets built more near Brookings as opposed to Medary. And Medary is south of Brookings, but it is not Brookings. And so 7 miles in today isn't very long, but 7 miles when you're talking about on foot or by wagon or horse, that might as well be 7 states. That's like a really far way, especially if you're talking about getting goods and taking them from your place to the railroad tracks. Like, this is a lot. And so that was their make or break for Medary. And so Medary just kind of never gets a chance to get up and going. But, you know, the families, again, are successful. They stay. Some people move their houses closer to Brookings, and other people stay, but it's just not going to be a successful town. It was named for the governor of Minnesota Territory at the time, which kind of makes the Dakota Land Company people a little bit brown-nosers, but neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But the memorials are cool because they have this great stone like obelisk pillar thing that they built in like the 1920s, and then this historical marker is from 1957, so 100 years after they tried to make Medary happen. And it's really cool that the people of the area still want to make sure that the generations to come understand, hey, we tried.
Yeah.
We tried.
Very cool. And there's some remnants of Medary if you've been in Brookings too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really cool. And it's really neat to see, again, that people are keeping that history alive because it's a really interesting history.
For sure. Do you have a podcast on this?
You know, I feel like I'm hibernating right now.
That's fine. Take your time.
It doesn't mean I'm not out there learning the history. It's just I'm not sharing it outside of here.
There's going to be a bunch coming out at once, I believe.
Right.
You know?
We don't know.
You never know.
Yeah.
You gotta always stay tuned.
That's
Check
right.
that out. Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Stick around. We have more after the break.